out there yanking stuff.
We'll hold for just a few minutes for late folks.
Sure.
But we'll get started in just a little bit.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Hi, Karen. How are you?
Was saying that she liked the picture of the room. I said it's a black sea bass. And we got, I don't know if you've ever seen the Channel Islands picture book that Tim Bob did. So, pick it up. Because he's got 1, 2, 3 pictures right here. So we met Tim. I used to do power squad in both squads. So I'd be down here for that. So kind of Channel Islands regular. Not 2 days in a row. Oh yeah, thanks. Yeah, Tim's a great instructor. When she worked in Santa Barbara?
No. When was that?
She was at the museum, let's see, it's been 3 years now.
Oh,
So
okay.
she was there 4 years prior to that. So.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
This is Melissa's husband, John. I don't know if you
Oh,
guys
hi.
know.
I'm Heather.
A pleasure. Nice to meet you.
Yeah. Maybe she looks like vaguely familiar to me, and maybe that's why.
Yeah, she was at the museum.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think she'd be over at the Botanical Garden sometimes for events. And
Uh-huh.
stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah, we might have crossed paths. I've been at the garden for 8 years. Yeah.
That's a little BLT or Botanical Garden cross paths. You're making jokes that you need to know.
Yeah.
And does the Botanical Garden have a big nursery where they raise rare plants?
We do, yeah. I'll talk a little bit about it here. I'm in the conservation department, and so we'll usually grow plants if we're trying to study them or if we're trying to make seeds or plants for restoration. But then we also have a big living collections nursery, which includes growing some rare plants, as well as our retail nursery. But, yeah.
I was telling Karen that I went out to Santa Monica Mountain. There's a nursery.
Oh yeah, with the Samo Foundation?
Samo Foundation.
Uh-huh,
You got
yeah.
it. And we went out there with the Master Gardener group 3 weeks ago. But anyhow, it was so interesting that there are some plants right there that are nowhere else in the world.
Yeah.
And I know it's got to be the same here.
Yeah.
And it can't be weather. It's got to be soil and so many other factors. So
Yeah.
really looking forward to your talk tonight.
Yeah, yeah, the Santa Monica Mountains are super cool. There's
Yeah.
a lot of weird stuff.
Restoration going on.
Yeah. Yeah, we actually just hired one of the Samo Fund nursery folks at the garden. And she's working in our nursery now.
That's great.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, they have a great program there.
I was saying I just started a Master Gardener program through the UC.
Oh, cool,
I
yeah.
just started 2.5 months in.
Uh-huh.
Tomorrow we start our hands-on project on a pollinator garden.
Oh, fun. Where are you going to put that?
It's at the Veterans Home at East Ventura at Telephone and Wells. Our plot is 20 feet by 55, which is gigantic for 3 people because we only work 1 day a week for a few hours.
Yeah.
Because,
Got your hands full, huh?
man, absolutely.
Yeah.
And they gave me a book to start looking at. I didn't realize there were so many different native milkweeds in Southern California.
Yeah. I know.
All right.
They're beautiful.
Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right.
Hi, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started here. Good evening. Welcome to the Ventura Land Trust's Environmental Speaker Series. My name is Melissa Baffa, and I'm the Executive Director of Ventura Land Trust. The purpose of the Environmental Speaker Series is to bring members from our community together to learn about the natural world and the people who study it, learn from it, and protect it. This series is offered for free as a benefit to our community, but we do welcome donations to help support this and other programs sponsored by the Ventura Land Trust. Suggested donation is $10, and you can contribute through the donation box outside on the table or by going online to venturalandtrust.org. Before we get started with tonight's program, I wanted to provide a quick update on the status of our preserves. Harmon Canyon is currently closed due to the recent rain. An assessment is being conducted by staff tomorrow, and the lower canyon is likely to open sometime in the next several days. So keep posted by following us on social media and join our mailing list to receive updates. For our river preserves, Big Rock and Willoughby, the rains so far this winter have been lighter than predicted, and the preserves continue to recover from last winter's fierce storms. The biggest challenge at those preserves is the reintroduction of arundo. I know, I got some knowing nods and groans, yes, boo. So that unfunded work has to continue this year so that arundo doesn't get a foothold on those preserves again. If you'd like to sign up to help, you can visit the volunteer page on our website to get involved. Lastly, Mariano Rancho is still on schedule at this time to open to the public in 2025. More to come on that. Now on to tonight's program. We're very excited to welcome Heather Schneider tonight to learn about her work on the conservation of rare plants. She is a senior rare plant conservation scientist overseeing the Rare Plant Conservation Program, which includes conducting research, implementing conservation and recovery actions, managing the conservation seed bank, and providing outreach and education focused on California's rare plants. Heather's research interests and experience are in plant ecology, seed banks, conservation, invasive plants, and evolutionary biology. She earned a doctorate in botany and plant sciences from UC Riverside, worked as an ecologist for the U.S. Geological Survey, and was a postdoctoral scholar at UC Santa Barbara before joining the Santa Barbara Botanic Garden. Oops, we just timed out. Heather's been working to understand and protect the California flora since 2005. Now, after I prepared these comments, our conservation director, Laura, sent me a couple extra notes about Heather, so I'm going to throw in here. Heather has been interviewed by the New York Times and National Public Radio about plant conservation, including inspiring a New York Times quotation of the day, describing last year's super bloom. This is how we feed our souls. And so, yes, that's a perfect intro, and I'm really excited to feed our souls tonight with Heather. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Heather. Thank you.
Oh.
Yep, it did it.
Hi. I think that was one of the nicest introductions I've ever received, so thanks very much to Melissa and Laura. I'm really excited to be here, and I'm also very flattered by how full this room is, so thanks for choosing to spend your evening with me. As the introduction mentioned, I'm going to talk about the work that we're doing at Santa Barbara Botanic Garden to conserve rare plants across California. The picture here is Comati Canyon amole, and just so you know, you'll see some designations next to some of the species names. The FT means this is federally threatened, so it's on the Federal Endangered Species List. CR means that it's on the California Endangered Species List and ranked as rare. And if you're familiar with the big white soap plants that you see sometimes late in the season on the trails around here, this is a very diminutive, rare relative of that. These get just a few inches tall, whereas you usually think of soap plant as getting about my height sometimes. So I just want to start off making sure we're all on the same page. I'm sure everybody has their own idea about what a rare plant is, but I'm just going to give you my perspective. And at its most simple, a rare plant is just a species that is uncommon. It might mean that it's listed under the federal or state Endangered Species Act, or in California, we have the California Native Plant Society that manages an inventory of all the rare plants in California. And as you'll see later in the talk, the vast majority of them are not listed under the California or Federal Endangered Species Act. So it's a really nice umbrella that helps protect rare plants that don't have legal standing in that way. And I've tried to sprinkle in as many Ventura County rare plants as I can. So you have your beautiful Ojai fritillary here, which is not listed, but is in the California Native Plant Society Rare Plant Inventory. That's what that CRPR means, California Rare Plant Rank. 1B2 is the most rare rank that they have. Okay, why are some plants rare? I'd love to get some ideas from all of you if you want to just shout out. Why do you think some plants are rare?
Invasive plants.
Invasive plants?
They just are.
They just are? That's a great answer, yeah.
I think a limited habitat.
Limited habitat. See, you guys don't need me. So when we think about rarity and how it happens, we think of a combination of intrinsic factors, so things about that plant species itself that led it to be rare, and then also extrinsic factors. What are the outside forces limiting this plant in some way? Some plants just are rare, and that's intrinsic. Others are rare because of something else, that's extrinsic, and then a lot of them are experiencing a little bit of both. So again, at its most basic, this can mean that there are very few individuals in the landscape, and this can happen for a variety of reasons. Perhaps this species is something that has male and female plants, which means that they need two individuals to mate like humans do, whereas most plants are bisexual and can mate with themselves if they need to, but needing two plants to mate can make things rare. Sometimes plants have a really narrow geographic distribution or limited habitat. This is often because they're tied to something specific in the ecosystem. So it might be a soil specialist where it can only grow on one type of soil, and that soil doesn't occur in a lot of places. So that gives it a narrow geographic distribution. And sometimes you get both, and those are the super rare plants that are just really in one place. When they're in just one place in the whole world, we call them endemic. And so that can really feed into that. And then laying over all of that is threats. We usually say that climate change, invasive plants, and human development are the three big threats to rare plants. It gets a lot more nuanced than that, but you can probably imagine how those things work to change ecosystem dynamics. A lot of the things that humans do limits habitat. We're changing the landscape by bulldozing it and building on it. Okay, but what does this look like in California? We're in the most botanically diverse state in the Union, lucky us, and there are more than 8,000 kinds of plants in California. About 6,500 of those are native, and we have about 1,500 non-natives, but it's not quite as dire as it sounds. They're not all invasive. Some are just horticultural escapes that don't go very far from people. Others are invasive plants, and those are things that folks like the Ventura Land Trust are trying to control because they cause ecological harm. And so we want to get those plants out of our landscapes. So that leaves us with more than a third of our plants that are rare in California. It's approaching 40%. We've got more than 2,400 kinds of rare plants. California, because we're such a large state, we have so much geographic and geologic heterogeneity across our landscapes that this has led to amazing diversification of plants. And so we are one of 36 global biodiversity hotspots on the planet. Again, lucky us. And so this leads to a lot of rarity because things evolved to be here in the unique little pockets of California. But only a small fraction of those are protected under the state and federal Endangered Species Act. And so you can see we have 181 plants on the federal list, 225 on the California list, but some of those overlap. And the vast majority of our rare plants don't have that formal legal protection. So on this pie chart here, I'm trying to break down the CNPS rare plant inventory a little bit for you. The California rare plant rank 1B, which is almost half of those plants, that big yellow wedge, that's the most rare ranking that they give to plants. And everything that's in that yellow piece of the pie qualifies for listing on these endangered species lists. And the good news is that here in California, because we care about our landscapes, they're also included in California Environmental Quality Act review. So if you want to develop on land and it's full of CNPS 1B plants, you're going to have to talk about how you're going to save those plants and protect them or mitigate for them. 2Bs are rare in California but common elsewhere. So this might be a plant that spills just over the border from Nevada, for example, and we're sort of the edge of where it can grow. So it's not very common here, but it's pretty secure elsewhere. The neon green small wedge is the rank 3s. Those are things that we are pretty sure are rare, but we need more information about them. And that's one of the other threats to rare plants, is that we often don't know enough about them to effectively manage and conserve them. And then that sort of dark gray wedge is the rank 4s. And those are plants that are uncommon and they're sort of on a watch list. They're not super imperiled yet, but they're fairly uncommon. And so we want to make sure that nothing happens. And then we have that sad little blue wedge, which we do have some plants that are extinct in California. We have 21 plants that are just totally extinct that used to grow in California. And then we have 26 kinds of plants that are extirpated. And what extirpated is basically it's a local extinction. So if you have 10 populations of a plant and one of them disappears, that population was extirpated, but the species is not extinct. So the good news is those 26 plants are still hanging on outside of California. The bad news is we've lost them here. And just to help you think about what this looks like in Ventura County, you guys have 159 kinds of rare plants. There's one extinct plant. It was a shrub that only grew on San Nicolas Island and no longer occurs there. There's one extirpated plant, which was in the sunflower family, but it still grows. That one was also on the Channel Islands. That one still grows in Baja California, so it's not extinct from the earth, which is good. And then you can see you have a handful of plants on the Federal and State Endangered Species Act, and then a pretty good mix of those 1B really rare plants and also 4 kind of watch list uncommon plants. And to give you an idea of what some of these are, one you probably are unlikely to have seen in the yellow wedge, that's Ventura marsh milkvetch, and it has a very interesting story. That is a federally and state listed plant that I'll tell you a little bit more about. And then an example of a rank 4 plant that occurs in Ventura is the Humboldt lily, which I think you can't just help but love. They have a huge flower. I mean, it's like an orange softball. They're really fantastic. So the fact that you're here today means I think you have some idea about why we should care about rare plants. But I'll tell you anyway, at least a little bit. And I'm going to start with just a really basic premise, which is that everything in nature is connected. Just like all the systems in our bodies, everything in nature is connected. And when we take out one of those pieces, we affect everything else. And one thing that I don't like about these these are food webs, but when you look at ecological interaction flow charts, as I did, trying to find something that would be good for this talk, they never include humans. And we are part of nature. We have, humans, if you think about the Channel Islands, we know that for a minimum of 13,000 years, the Chumash people were interacting with and forming those landscapes, working with those plants. So we are nature, but everything's connected. And so let's imagine that we're thinking of this food web, and that shrub is rare, and it goes extinct. That has downstream, or in this case, upward effects on the rest of the food chain. So now the squirrel doesn't have any food, the deer doesn't have any food, the rabbit is short on food, and of course that in turn affects the higher level predators. which in turn will affect everything else in the ecosystem. And an example of this is, and how rare plants can do this, because it can be hard to think about, how can something that's so uncommon play a big role? But it turns out that a lot of rare plants have a unique function in the ecosystem that isn't filled by their more common neighbors. In this case, this little plant is salt marsh birdsbeak. It's a hemiparasite that grows in salt marshes from about San Luis Obispo County down into Baja California. And the reason that that matters is because this plant is a hub for pollinators in the salt marsh. There's very little other nectar available at the time when this plant is flowering. And because it can keep the pollinator community going until everything else starts blooming again in the spring. And so I hope I've convinced you in one small way that, rare plants are important. And just thinking about all the linkages and keeping all the pieces in these ecological webs, 1 in every 3 bites of food we take is thanks to pollinators. And it's not just bees, which we usually think about. I recently learned that chocolate is pollinated by a fly, by the chocolate midge. So we really have to keep all the critters, even the ones that we sometimes swat at. And of course, I think everybody knows plants and trees are important for getting oxygen, clean air. Sometimes when I feel particularly poetic, I like to think about the fact that the oxygen that I'm inhaling may have been once exhaled by a giant redwood, and like, how cool is that? But it's also the tiny plants. So about half of the oxygen on Earth comes from phytoplankton, little tiny microscopic marine plants. So we need all the pieces from giant to really tiny. And what I think is the only quotable piece of legislation in the history of the United States is the Endangered Species Act. There's a really beautiful, right in the beginning when they're kind of making their case for why they made this legislation, they made this list and said that the fish, wildlife, and plants that we're listing here are of aesthetic, ecological, educational, historical, recreational, and scientific value to the nation and its people. And what I really like about that is that it touches on so many different ways that plants can impact our lives. It doesn't have to just be, oh, well, I need air, so I guess I better care about plants, or, well, I eat plants, so that's good. It can also just be, I think plants are beautiful and plants inspire my art. Or, if you have certain traditions tied to a plant, any way that you connect with plants is the right way. And so I think that instead of asking, why should we care about rare plants, I would say, how could you not? Okay, so they're off my soapbox now. I'll just tell you about what we're doing at Santa Barbara Botanic Garden. So the garden is almost 100 years old. 2026 will be our centennial. And from day one, we have been focused exclusively on native plants. We were the first botanic garden in the country to do so, and we're very proud of it. And our mission is to protect plants and habitats for the well-being of people and our planet. So always keeping that connection in mind, and that helping plants is helping people. And in the conservation department where I work, we have sort of a mantra, and we talk about, my boss always talks about layers of the cake, and how you have to build every step to do effective conservation. And the bottom layer of that cake, I realized I should have inverted these bullets, but the bottom layer of that cake is understanding. We can't protect what we don't understand. Protect is the middle, and that's largely what my team focuses on. And then restoring. Once you understand it and you figure out what the problems are, then you can start to put the system back together. And then the icing on the cake, which we all do, is advocate for plants. We like to say that we speak for plants because they can't speak for themselves. And that includes everything from me getting to share some of our ideas with you today to trying to do larger outreach and even with the scientific community. So we're always trying to spread the conservation message. And so I'm going to mostly focus on protect, but only kind of, because my team, I manage the rare plant conservation program at the garden, and we are a microcosm of everything that we do in the garden's conservation department, because we also have to understand rare plants to protect them. And then once we figure out what's going on, we put effort into restoring them. And so the ways that I'm going to give you a few examples of how we understand rare plants. And this is just a magnificently recently burned slope in Madera County on Shut-Eye Peak. And this is my field program manager, Sean Carson, pressing plants. We were looking for, you can see sort of a little hint of yellow across the slopes. We were looking for this Shut-Eye Peak fawn lily, and it responds really well to fire. And so before this fire came through, this plant was known from the area, but not nearly in the abundance that we saw right after fire. So we were on this charred, blackened slope, and then there was just like golden droplets all over it with these beautiful lilies. And so it's just a really magical moment. Okay, so the first step to understanding something is to figure out what its story is. And it all starts with field surveys for us. This map is just showing you all the places that my team worked this year. So you can see we really get around. We hit all the islands. We're working on both sides of the Sierra and even up in Ukiah. So we get a lot of miles under our belt. And to tell this story, we're going to learn everything that you would think of when you're a kid and they teach you how to tell a story, who, what, where, when, why. That's what we do with these plants. So we want to know, okay, which species are you, which is not always clear for rare plants. What habitat are these things growing in? Where's the population located? How many plants are there? Where is it in its life cycle? And then what are the threats? Do we think that if we come back in a year, 10 years, 50 years, that this population will still be there? And then sometimes we dig a little bit deeper. So my team runs our conservation seed bank at the garden, and we do a lot of germination studies. So trying to figure out, how do you grow these plants? And we're doing that because learning how to germinate a seed can tell you a lot about what that plant experiences in the field naturally. And also, for the conservation seed bank, we want to make sure those seeds are staying alive over time. And when we start to get a hint of germination rates dropping, then we know we have to go out and either collect more seed or grow plants in the nursery and collect seeds from them. So when we do a germination study, we do what any gardener would do. We start to test things to break dormancy. So many of California's rare plants have dormancy mechanisms, which I think is like ecological skepticism. They're like, I know every year's not good, so I have to make sure that I don't germinate at the first drop of precipitation, because that might not work out for me, especially if you're an annual plant and you have 1 year to complete your whole life cycle. If you're an annual plant and you don't make any seeds, you failed and you don't get a second chance. So California seeds are skeptical. One treatment that we use a lot is cold stratification, and that sounds really fancy because it has a lot of syllables, but we just put seeds in a refrigerator and pretend that it's winter, and then we take them out and pretend it's spring. That's stratification. And then a lot of seeds will have a thick seed coat, and the function of that is really to keep water out, because once a seed starts imbibing or taking a drink, that's when it starts to get active, and it's like, oh, things are happening, I should germinate. So this thick seed coat prevents that from happening when it shouldn't. And there are a lot of ways that we can break that seed coat. Through nicking it with a razor blade, scarifying it by rubbing it on sandpaper. We sometimes put seeds in the oven. Can you imagine putting an endangered plant seed in the oven and then somebody sees you and they're like, what are you doing? And you say, I'm baking endangered plant seeds. And it's happened before. People are alarmed by it. But it turns out that, if you're a plant that's adapted to wildfire, heat can crack open your seed and you're stoked to be in that sauna. And it just takes a nice big drink and gets that seed all active. And then we have some chemical treatments in our pockets too. So aside from heat cracking seeds open, there's also an effect of ash and smoke on a lot of seeds. So some plants have a chemical dormancy, and what they're waiting for is not the heat of the fire, but for the first rain after the fire, when all that ash washes through the soil and washes over the seed and tells it, it's time. Everybody got burned. There's room for you. And then gibberellic acid is a plant hormone that we use to just kind of kick seeds in the pants when they really won't cooperate. It will force germination on a lot of plants. Okay, that was a lot longer than I thought it would be, but hopefully you're going to go home and cook some seeds tonight. So just to give you an example of how we've used this kind of study, a few years ago we had a contractor approach us and say, we have this federally endangered Lompoc basanta growing on our property. We have to do some mitigation and plant a ton of plants, like hundreds of plants. The problem with Lompoc basanta is, except for one population, most of them don't make seeds. They spread by runners underground. So they're all clones, and they need genetic diversity to make seeds. Thankfully, this site, they did make seeds, but we knew we couldn't produce hundreds of plants from cuttings, which is how a lot of people propagate this plant. No one knew how to germinate it. So we did a study, and in this chart, I promise you there are not many charts in this talk. At the x-axis, we have the 4 treatments that we implemented on the seeds, and on the y-axis is the average % germination that we got from each of the treatments. The white bars are seeds that were germinated in the light, so that would be simulating a seed that's right on the surface of the soil that didn't get buried. And then we also germinated seeds in the dark, so we wrapped them in tin foil and only used indirect red light to try to check the germination of them. And the important thing to know here is that treating the seeds with liquid smoke worked way better than anything else. You can see you can coax some seeds to germinate no matter what you do, but if you want to get 90+% germination, you got to use liquid smoke, and they especially liked being in the dark, which makes sense to me because this is a shrub that responds to disturbance and sort of dies back in the environment as the chaparral. This grows in chaparral, so hardwood shrubby community, really tightly packed. As the chaparral shrubs get thicker and thicker, this sort of dies back. So these seeds are made to wait in the soil seed bank, until a fire tells them, hey, your neighbors are down, now's your time to shine. And so this worked great. Another thing that we do to understand rare plants is study what's called their demography. And this is really just studying their life cycle over time and how the population changes from year to year. California jewelflower is an annual plant in the mustard family. It's federally and state endangered and used to be pretty widespread across the Central Valley, but due to agriculture, lost much of its habitat. So our project is focused on 3 populations that occur in Carrizo Plain National Monument. And like I mentioned, we're following these plants over time. Maybe you guys remember the super bloom last year. This was like just the best year ever to study this plant. I love this picture anyways. It was just fantastically beautiful out there. So we're following the life cycle over time. We're trying to understand, of the plants that we see growing early in the season, how many of them survive to reproduce and make seeds, and how are they getting eaten by other things. And then we're trying to use this over several years of data to understand, do we think these populations are going to persist in the future? Is there something we need to do for them? What's going on? And then we also did some seed collections to bring them into our conservation seed bank, just as a long-term conservation action. So this is a kind of snapshot of what that life cycle looks like. So there's the seedling stage that we see real early in the year. We're actually going out for our first visit in 2024 next week, so I expect to see something like this. Then we document when they go into the flowering phase, when they start making fruits, and then at the end when they're pretty much dead but just dispersing their fruits. And we've set up plots, which you can see in the photo over there, where we're identifying 30 plants per plot that we're following exactly. And then otherwise, we're documenting how many plants we see at the beginning of the year and the end of the year. And we noticed this year that there was a lot of herbivory. Things were eating them. And what we did was we wanted to know what's getting eaten and when, and how does it change over the season. So on the x-axis, you have the month of the observation. On the y-axis, the number of instances of herbivory that we observed. So in February, we saw a little bit more than 100 instances of herbivory on leaves on the plants that we were tracking. So you figure that's a lot of leaves, but then you see this purple line, which is the stems, and those really got decimated at peak bloom in April. Fruits and flowers were also getting eaten, but not very much. And I had some hypotheses about who was doing this. And they were confirmed with photo and video evidence. This is the giant kangaroo rat, I think maybe the most charismatic animal on Carrizo Plain. It's also federally and state endangered, just like the jewel flower, which turns out to be a favorite snack of that rodent. Kangaroo rats and jewel flower are really closely associated with each other. They make all these little dens, and there's lots of disturbance, and the jewel flower likes to grow on top of those. And so for a long time, I suspected that this was happening, but I never had a wildlife camera to figure it out. And then we were thinking, okay, one of the things that these kangaroo rats do is they mow part of their territory. They really like open space so that they can forage, and also they can see their predators coming. They don't want to be caught off guard. So I thought, sometimes you'll just see a jewel flower stem just laying there. They cut it down and then they left it. Like, tell your friends, we'll be back. And I wondered, are they eating it or are they just mowing? And from a series of photos and videos, they're consuming them. So here you can see here, oh, this was February of last year, and there was snow on the ground. I don't know if you can tell. It's 23 degrees, and that's snow at Carrizo. It was so cold. So we've got a few little helpless jewel flowers, and then our giant charismatic predator. And there it's like, oh, hey, jewel flower, I know what's up. And then look, it has it right in its little paws, and then it ate it. And then it disappeared. It thought it got away with it. So it was just super interesting for us. Our next step is to dig into the kangaroo rat literature. There's such a thing. And figure out, like, does everybody know this? Are we the last to know? Because it was pretty exciting for us. So that story's to be continued. That was just our first year last year of that project, so we're still figuring it out. But thinking about protecting rare plants now, that sort of middle layer of the cake. As I mentioned, we have a conservation seed bank at the garden. A lot of people, when they think of a conservation seed bank, think of a giant frozen mountain on an island off of Norway, and the Svalbard Global Seed Vault. We're not quite that fancy, but we have a really important seed bank that represents a lot of Central California, the Channel Islands, and the Eastern and Western Sierra Nevada also. We have about 1,300 collections in our seed bank, and they represent about 350 kinds of rare plants and more than 3 million seeds. And we back up a portion of our collection at NLGRP, which I'll buy someone dinner if they know what this stands for. It's the National Laboratory for Genetic Resources Preservation. I can't believe you guys don't follow them on Instagram. That is the U.S. National Seed Bank. It's in Fort Collins, Colorado. It's not quite Svalbard, but it is at high elevation. So if something were to happen and they lost all power, they would be in a cool, drier than normal environment up at high elevation, and those seeds could be protected for a long time. So for us, that's our way of making sure that if catastrophe strikes at Santa Barbara Botanic Garden, many of our collections are backed up far enough away that they would be safe. Our oldest collection's from 1985, so not that old. And The highest elevation collection we collected a few years ago from the top of Mount Patterson in Mono County at about 11,000 feet. So here's a little bit of a smattering of where our collections are from. We have plants from all of the Channel Islands, like I mentioned, Central Coast, Sierra, and we do have some Baja California collections, but not too many of those. And I don't want you to read this whole slide. I would never do that to you. But I just want to give you the idea that there are a lot of things we can do with seeds in the seed bank. I think that a common misconception is that we're just like seed hoarders and we're just collecting them and they're going to sit in there forever. But seed banks are living collections. So I work at a botanic garden. Most of what people think about is the living collection, the garden grounds. But the seed bank is also alive. To put our seeds into the seed bank, we dry them down and then we freeze them, and that puts them into a little bit of a cryogenic slumber where we get their metabolism a lot lower than it would be in natural conditions. And that extends their lifespan quite a bit, but it doesn't make them immortal. And so for us, the important thing is that we don't let seeds die in the freezer. And that's why we do those germination tests. So we try to keep up on them and it's like a use them or lose them kind of situation here. But we also use them to answer important research questions. One of the challenges of working with rare plants is that you can't just do whatever you want to them because there aren't that many of them. But if you have seeds, you can make plants in the nursery that you can manipulate and learn from, and that can inform what you do in the wild. And so all that to say that seeds are alive, they're alive in the seed bank, and it takes a lot of constant care for us to keep this collection going and making sure that it's maximally useful. And then kind of the equal but mirror image of that is that our living collections at the garden are also conservation collections. We have a lot of rare plants in our collection, some of which represent the only genotypes of a rare plant anywhere outside of nature. And one example of that is the Santa Cruz Island bush mallow. That's what Stephanie Rains here is looking at on Santa Cruz Island. This is a federally endangered shrub that only grows on Santa Cruz Island, so it's endemic to that island. There are only a handful of wild populations on Earth, and although it does pretty well in garden settings, the islands were subject to centuries of impacts from introduced animals that ate this like a baby salad mix. It has big leaves that are very soft, and so they were really impacted by that. The animals are all off of the northern islands now, and they've been recovering, but also scientists and conservationists have been doing conservation outplantings to try to make more populations across the island so that we have redundancy. So if something happens to one, we have a backup. The cuttings that we took here aren't represented in those restoration collections or restoration populations, so we're trying to back those up and then also have a backup on the mainland. So these are cuttings that we took in December, just last month, from 4 wild populations, and these populations weren't represented anywhere in botanic gardens in California. So this is an important way that we can back up some of that genetic diversity outside of its natural habitat. Okay, restoring rare plants, getting our boots dirty, sort of. I'm first going to tell you about the nursery. So someone asked me earlier if we grow rare plants at the Botanic Garden in our nursery, and we do for a variety of reasons. The main thing that my team is growing plants for right now is for what we call seed bulking. So one challenge with rare plants is that, especially annual plants where restoration is necessarily seed-based, rather than growing container plants and then planting them on the island. For an annual plant, it makes more sense to try to restore using seeds. But when you have a small population, you can't get that many seeds when you go out to make a collection. And so we could either have very tiny collections over time, or we can take seeds collected from the wild, grow them in the nursery, be busy little bees ourselves, and make a lot more seed than we could ever collect in the wild. And that's what we've been doing since about 2020 for a suite of plants on the Channel Islands. And so over the last few years, we've produced more than 500,000 seeds of 8 different taxa. This is Malacothrix indecora. Oh gosh, sorry guys, I'm really bad at common names sometimes. It's something dandelion, I think. Sorry. Oh man. Huh? Oh, I thought someone said it. This one's from Santa Rosa Island. It grows there and also on Santa Cruz Island, but only in those 2 places in the whole world. So we set up these tents that exclude bugs so that we can be the pollinators. And this is because we're often growing plants from different populations of the same species, and we don't want to cross-pollinate anything that wouldn't cross-pollinate in nature. There could be reasons to do that in some cases, but we tend to take a conservative approach, and whenever possible, we're trying to just do everything the way it would happen in nature to the best of our ability. So we isolate them in these tents, and then we get out our paintbrushes and we move pollen. It's more fun than it sounds. And then eventually we want to use these seeds for something. So this is my field lead again, Sean Carson in the foreground. In the middle is John Knapp, one of our very close collaborators who works for the Nature Conservancy, which owns most of Santa Cruz Island. And then Stephanie Rains, our grounds manager at the far end in the blue. We took the Dudlea seeds that we made Santa Cruz Island Live Forever, federally and state listed succulent, which is what I'm pollinating in that picture on the left there. We made tons and tons and tons of seeds, and what we did this last December on Santa Cruz Island was we set up plots where we put seeds down in places where it doesn't currently grow, but we think it could. And so we're trying to take an experimental approach and learn from our successes and failures and figure out what's going on. The other thing we do, this is the most audacious project I've ever embarked on. We're trying to have a little Jurassic Park moment at Santa Barbara Botanic Garden. So I promised I would tell you about the Ventura marsh milkvetch. This is a federally and state endangered perennial herb, so it doesn't get super woody, but it lives for multiple years. It's in the pea family and was thought to be extinct until 1997 when people found it in Oxnard growing, you know, basically in a kind of dumpy site where some soil had been moved. And all of a sudden, this plant wasn't extinct anymore, which was hugely exciting. Immediately, people began collecting seeds from these plants. They're like, we gotta make more populations. We can't let anything happen this time. But there's only one wild population, and we don't think that's probably where they were actually naturally occurring. It was just that they moved some soil there and there was seeds there, and that stimulated them. And if you think about genetic diversity and having very few parent plants to start with, all the restoration populations have very few parents. So we worry about over the long term, do they have enough genetic diversity to adapt? Are we going to start seeing too much inbreeding? And so enter California Native Plant Society and Santa Barbara Botanic Garden trying to diversify the restoration stock by resurrecting extinct genotypes from herbarium specimens. So this is a picture of an herbarium specimen, if you're not familiar with it. For most of human history, people have collected plants, pressed them between something to make them flat, let them dry out, and they last hundreds of years that way. They're a gold mine of information, you know, kind of a beautiful example of science and art melding together. But also sometimes those specimens have seeds on them. And when a plant goes extinct, that could be the only seeds that we have. And in the case of Ventura marsh milkvetch, that's what happened. So ever the nervous Nelly, I first wanted to try growing some fresh seeds. I said, I don't want to work with anything that's 100 plus years old until I know how to do it with something I have more of. So we did some germination tests like I described before on fresh seeds, and we got a lot of germination and a lot of plants. There was also a case in Eastern Europe where they germinated, same thing, same genus, Astragalus. They had seeds on an herbarium sheet that were 100 years old, and they germinated. And so we're cautiously optimistic. We have 2 herbarium specimens from the Oxnard area. One's from 1902, one's from 1925. And we collected some of those seeds, and under a microscope, we nicked those seeds. So that's what I'm showing you here. And we took a razor blade, and this is one of those plants I was telling you about that has a really thick seed coat to prevent it from drinking any water. And that's how it hangs out for 100 years on an herbarium sheet. And so we very carefully nicked the seed, removed that piece of seed coat. I'm really bad. So that's it. We made this little, impression for water to enter. And then we soaked them in water. And now we're waiting for them to germinate. I really wish I could be like, oh, fireworks moment, we have the plants, but not yet. And we have a plan for what to do. These seeds have been waiting for more than a century, so we're waiting for them now. It's only been like 3.5 or 4 weeks. We're giving them time to wake up, realize what century it is. But we have some 2nd and 3rd tier plans to try if this doesn't happen. And I'm drawing toward the near end of my time here, but I want to end with this idea that success is possible, because it really is. I might seem like I'm very cheerful, but I'm not like a super optimistic person in my regular life. So when I tell you success is possible, I mean it. And right across the channel from us, we have some really great examples of that. One is warm and fuzzy. The Channel Islands fox is the fastest ever delisting of any species on the federal endangered species list. This was an example of an animal that was in major decline on the Channel Islands. They listed it, and when you list something, it's not just that, oh, it's on this list now, so it's special. It means that legally, the land manager has to do something. It also means that the federal government has to provide money to do something. And so getting something listed provides money, attention, and political will to make change. And so that's why it's important that we have these kinds of rules. And in just 14 years, they were able to recover the Channel Islands fox and take it off the list. But not to be outdone, the Channel Islands rare plants made themselves known this year, and in 2023, 6 of them came off of the federal endangered species list. 2 months ago, I was standing at this podium celebrating the delisting of the Santa Cruz Island Dudleya, which is shown in this picture, which we pollinated and seeded. I've been working on this plant just for about 8 years. There's decades of work that went into all these things getting delisted. But I can't tell you how good it feels to get to be part of something coming off of that list. And it makes me feel like, okay, everything we're doing is worth it. We just have to figure out how to keep doing it and do it more. And that when we really put our minds to something, we can make big change. And as Melissa and Laura pointed out, I had the opportunity, I was really, really humbled to be interviewed by NPR's Weekend Edition about the delisting of this Dudleya. If you'd like to listen to it, you can scan this QR code. I'm not doing this so that you think that I'm cool. I wanna really highlight that I think getting national coverage for conservation stories is so important. I think that it's really easy to feel down in the dumps. There's a lot of bad news about the planet recently. I don't know if you've heard, but
It's in the news.
yeah. But there's reason for hope, and we have a blueprint for how to save the world. So let's do it. You want to do it? you can volunteer with the Ventura Land Trust and help save Ventura County. I know that there are a lot of great opportunities helping to do things like weed control and even just visiting those places, patronizing those trails helps. And that's the same for the garden where I work. If you want to take a road trip north, come see us at Santa Barbara Botanic Garden. But you also have a botanic garden in Ventura. And just supporting places that care about plants and conservation helps. Gardening with native plants. I hope I've convinced you that everything is connected, and you can make yourself more connected if you're able to put native plants in your house. And that doesn't have to be in the ground. We don't all have yards. They can be a container plant. But everything you do creates a little bit more habitat for birds, bees, all, you name it. They're all going to come once you start gardening. Share your passion. There's some axiom about, tell 2 friends what you learned. But that really works. I think just passing it along, maybe if you enjoyed this, you want to invite somebody to the next lecture in this series and keep learning, keep growing. And then the last thing I'm going to say is that if you care about this, you should vote for people who care about it. You can do everything you want, but as I mentioned with the federal and state endangered species acts, a lot of the money that supports conservation comes from governments. And so if you want to make sure that you have access to open space, you want to make sure that your kids and grandkids get to see beautiful nature, you should make sure that your government knows that. And that's all I have for you. Thank you so much. I'm happy to take questions. This was a glorious sunset early in the season on Catalina Island last year. I listened to a podcast this morning about awe and how experiencing moments of awe can improve your mental health, your physical health, and I think that nature for me is one of the main places that I get awe, so I hope that I helped you with that a little bit today. But I'm happy to take any questions if folks. Sure.
How are you able to, you're with the Botanic Garden, but you're on the islands a lot. How are they connected?
Sure. So the question was, I work at a botanic garden, but I'm on the islands a lot. How are they connected? So our mission is to, as I mentioned, protect native plants and habitats for the benefit of people and the planet. And for my garden, we have about 20 folks working in the conservation department, and we take that mission seriously. We take it out across the state. So for my team, we're working all over the place, and we've developed partnerships over time to facilitate that kind of work. There's so much work and so much need. And our garden in particular has had a really long history of working on the Channel Islands, dating back to basically the founding almost 100 years ago. And so we partner with the Nature Conservancy, Channel Islands National Park, thank you for hosting, as well as the Navy, which owns some of the islands, and the Catalina Island Conservancy. So we're just trying to build partnerships and bring our expertise to help wherever we can. Yeah. Oh, with the mask.
I was very intrigued by taking the herbarium samples, getting seeds, and bringing those back. I mean, are there examples of actually things we think are extinct already, where that's being done?
Right, so the question was about taking seeds from herbarium samples, and are there examples where there are currently extinct plants and that's been done? They're doing it more and more in Hawaii, which is sort of the poster child for a worst case scenario on extinctions, but also where they're putting tons of resources into helping the islands to heal. And Hawaii, the islands are so rugged, a lot of the work happens via helicopter or people rappelling down cliffs, and they don't have really good seed collections, and they have a lot of plants that have gone extinct to the best of their knowledge. And they're implementing that quite a bit, and they are having some success. But I think that over time, this is going to become more and more common. There's another rare plant on the Channel Islands that's called Sabarophyllophilia. It's, the Santa Cruz Island rock cress. That, I know, well, that was close. It is a really diminutive little mustard that's an annual wildflower. It's named from Santa Cruz Island, but it hasn't been seen on that island for many, many decades. It does still occur on San Clemente and Catalina Island. We've been working on it. That's why I took this picture on Catalina Island. And there are some herbarium sheets with seeds from Santa Cruz Island. And so we're working to figure out what's the status of the plant on the other two islands where it grows. Are they even the same thing? Because they look kind of different and grow in different places. And then we're using herbarium specimens to also figure out what we think was on Santa Cruz Island and whether we want to try to use some of those seeds and see if we can repatriate original Santa Cruz Island plants, or if we think we're going to have to use some seeds from the two southern islands and start over on Santa Cruz. So I think there's a lot of room for this kind of work, but at the same time, we know we have to temper expectations because even though seeds can live a really long time, herbarium specimens have not been in the ideal, conditions for seed longevity. So we're kind of all learning as we go.
Well, how many people work with you at in the area that you're working at the gardens in Santa Barbara?
Yeah, so the conservation department is 20 some odd scientists. My team in particular, on the rare plant team, we're in the process of hiring a few new folks, and I think we're going to get up to 7 or 8 this year. Usually we hover somewhere around 5. So we get a lot of person miles driving all over the place, yeah.
And then one last thing then, so what are your funding sources for those 20 plus people?
Yeah, so what is our funding structure for the conservation department? We are mostly funded by grants and contracts, so a big part of my job is writing proposals and convincing mostly federal and state agencies that this work is needed and important. And then we do, the Botanic Garden's a nonprofit, so we do also take donations. And that's part of why I say come visit us. Every admission helps. But yeah, anybody else? Sure.
I didn't get to see the name of that one from Oxnard, but if you get to show it at the end, I take a picture of it. I took a picture, but I got the one after it. But I'm just wondering, do you know approximately where they found that in Oxnard? I'm an Oxnardian that's only been here since '95, so I just like to ask in case you know anything.
Yeah, I don't. So the question was, do I know exactly where the Ventura marshmallow vetch was found in the Oxnard area?
Actually, I know.
Okay, yeah, I couldn't give a very good verbal description, I think, but this is where you can meet your fellow land trust supporters and.
Yeah, it's Harbor and Fifth.
Harbor and Fifth, okay.
There you go.
It was where that big new development was going to be, kind of on the other side of the power line. And they had a big hill, and the big hill was where they found it, and they were actually irrigating it for a while, I guess.
Yeah, it likes moist soils, and so, sometimes when we move stuff around, plants like it. Did you have a question? Yeah.
Yeah, I thought the part where you mentioned understanding, restoring, protecting, and then advocating was such a cool sequence. And you also mentioned sometimes when you're propagating seeds or growing plants in a nursery, you manipulate those plants and then implement that or restore out in the field. And could you share maybe your favorite example of like what you've learned manipulating and how you implement it?
Oh, sure. What is my favorite thing I've learned doing those, like the germination studies?
Yeah, and then
or the hand pollinations?
Yeah, and then do you apply maybe things that you've learned in the nursery out in the field, like respiration stuff?
Yeah. With some of these rare plants, we don't even know what their mating system is. So if you're a plant, you can self-fertilize, which can happen a couple of different ways. One way is that you have anthers that have pollen, and then you have a stigma, that's the female part, and if you do what's called autogamous selfing, that's like auto is self, it means you don't need nobody's help. You just, pollen falls right on the stigma, you're good to go, you're getting seeds. Some plants can self-pollinate, but they need a pollinator to move that pollen for them. Other plants do outcrossing, and that's what I think most people think about, is like one bee going from one flower to the next and moving pollen around. But a lot of times we don't know how rare plants do that, what they need. And you can imagine that when you're trying to make seeds in the nursery, you kind of need to know, like, do I need to move pollen from one plant to the next? Can I do it all in here? Are you going to do it yourself? I don't know. And so there's a lot that could happen. I'm going to try to make my way back to that Ventura marsh milkvetch for you. So is this what you...
That's what I got.
You wanted this one. Okay, yeah. Sure. So the short answer to that is we have to figure out so much, and I think that we do implement some of it in the in restoration, but I think the biggest thing that I take away from those kinds of studies is, what do we have to do to heal this whole community to make sure that this population of rare plants is supported and everything that depends on it, and vice versa. And so in the case of like pollinators, for example, that often means figuring out, and we're doing this for the California jewel flower with some of our insect-focused collaborators in the conservation department. We want to know, okay, here are the pollinators visiting jewel flower, but who else do they visit, so that we can make sure we're restoring a complete community that supports these pollinators over time. Because jewel flower, you know, has its flash in the pan, but then you have to make sure those pollinators live long enough to continue on to the next year. And so I think it's kind of those like community level things, or for the Lompoc irbesanta, finding out that it really needs fire to have good germination was pretty interesting, because those can be the hardest problems to solve when we have altered landscape level processes. So we've effectively excluded fire from a lot of our landscapes. And if the only way you're going to get a good germination event is from fire, that creates a real restoration conundrum for us. So, yeah. Yes, ma'am?
What made you decide to nick that
Oh, this one. Yeah.
versus liquid smoke, which seemed like it had its best outcome?
Oh, okay. So what made us choose to nick the Ventura marsh milkvetch seeds rather than doing something like liquid smoke? So the liquid smoke worked really well for the Lompoc irbesanta, but we knew already that a lot of milkvetches have a really thick seed coat, and that boiling water treatment often works well on them, something that cracks the seed coat and then give it a drink. But I was pretty nervous to pour boiling water on a 100-year-old seed. And so we actually did, with the fresh seeds, we did a series of treatments that were totally focused on just creating a breach in that seed coat to allow the seed to drink. And what I wanted to do was figure out what I thought would be the most controlled and sort of gentlest way that we could do it. And in the end, that's why we chose the nicking. It turned out that fresh seeds of this species germinate like crazy. That wasn't a problem. But I wanted to do something where I felt like we really couldn't mess it up. We could be really careful. Yeah.
Could you explain liquid smoke? I mean, I know what it is when you cook with it, but...
Yeah. Liquid smoke for seed germination is exactly the same as liquid smoke that you cook with.
Really?
Yeah, the stuff that we cook with is all organically based. They make it just by burning something, soaking the ash in water, and then they just extract all that chemical. So it's totally organic, and I believe we used hickory smoke in this one. You can also, and we have done this before, you can also do a small scale simulated burn. So we'll get one of those, foil trays, and you can put some native plants and some other kind of flammable materials in there, and then burn it over your seeds. But that's just a lot harder to control. And if you burn your fire too hot, then you could kill your seeds. And so, yeah, it's just,
Do you just pour it over? I mean,
We make a dilute solution. So I think for the Lompoc basanta, I think we did a 1 to 10 dilution. So like, 1 milliliter of liquid smoke to 10 milliliters of water. And then we just soaked them overnight in that. Yeah, I know. In the back.
When you're using water, are you using distilled water or like the rainwater?
Yeah, I can tell you've done this before or thought a lot about it. We tend to use distilled water. If we don't have a formal really association with UC Santa Barbara, but we have like friends and stuff, and so sometimes we can get really good deionized water from their labs that has like nothing in it. But usually we'll just use distilled water so that we're not getting all that hard water minerals that are in our tap water in Santa Barbara. Yeah, sure.
The Dudley and 5 friends that were delisted, seems incredible that they all happened at the same time. So there had to be a focus to make that happen. Could you address that?
Sure. So how did 6 plants get delisted at the same time? The 4 on San Clemente Island they're owned by the Navy, the Coronado Island installation, if you're familiar with it. They have a really robust and well-funded environmental program. San Clemente Island's quite large, it's very diverse, it has a lot of single island endemic plants, meaning that they have a lot of plants that only occur on Clemente. So the government has to put a lot of energy into recovering things. They also have endangered birds and all kinds of stuff. And so they had been working for a really long time. And the process of recovery is necessarily long and slow. But then once you do it all, you also have to wait for the federal government to process all the paperwork. And so I think that for them, in total, they delisted, including some birds and maybe a lizard, I can't remember. They had delisted like 6 things on Clemente altogether, just 4 were plants. And I think that probably was planned. And then for the 2 on the northern islands, they were 2 that we'd all been talking about for a while, started helping with the assessments and getting the legal paperwork together. Probably like a year to 2 years ahead of time. And then 2023 was also the 50th anniversary of the Federal Endangered Species Act. And I think this is probably really the thrust of your question, is that it worked out nicely. We didn't delist anything that shouldn't be delisted, but people could have some foresight and see this is a really nice exclamation point for the 50th anniversary of the act. And so that's why we had sort of a big celebration here at Channel Islands National Park to just say, like, hey, 50 years later, this thing's still helping to prevent extinction.
Thank you.
Sure.
Do you ever use observations from iNaturalist to kind of get a heads up where some species are?
We do. We have a lot of databases that we use to find rare plant occurrences, and iNaturalist is increasingly becoming one of them. And so we pester a lot of people on iNat, like, hey, I'm a legit botanist. Where'd you see this super rare thing? You can trust me. And it's great. I would encourage, if you have the interest and inclination, I mean, it automatically will obscure the exact location of your rare plant data. But then if you want to, you can share it with folks like us who intend to do conservation. But it's super helpful because even with 20 people, which is a lot of scientists working on conservation, we just can't be everywhere. And so if you see something cool, document it. I mean, you can call me, you can email me, you can put it on iNat and I'll find you. But, yes.
I believe the second half of last year, there was a pretty big effort with the Santa Catalina Island Conservancy for the eradication of the mule deer. And so in the second half of last year, there was a lot of controversy about that being pushed back from the residents of the island and other people at large. I haven't really heard anything going into 2024 if there's a resolution about that. Is there anything new on that subject?
Right, so the question is about the effort to remove deer from Catalina Island. I'll preface this with, I do not speak for the Catalina Island Conservancy. They're still in the early phase. They're still having public meetings and things about it, trying to figure out the best thing to do. It has been really controversial. I think probably the best thing I can say is it doesn't feel good to remove animals. They're being killed. Nobody likes that, but I can tell you with absolutely zero uncertainty that none of those 6 plants that I showed would have been delisted if animals were still on Santa Cruz, Santa Rosa, San Miguel, San Clemente. When we make big mistakes like moving large animals onto an island where the apex predator is a 6-pound island fox, it has really big effects on the ecosystem, and Catalina Island will never be able to heal as long as the deer are there. And on the northern islands here, we've seen incredible recovery in the 20 some odd years since animals have started coming off. It's just super inspiring looking at the resilience of nature, but we have to make space for it to do that recovery. In the back there.
How was this plant ID, and was it the developer?
Oh, it was a California Native Plant Society member who just happened to see it. And so, yay, botany nerds to say, whoa, that is something weird. I think it is this. Yeah, it was totally opportunistic.
Is the developer required to enclose it and protect it?
I don't think they're developing there anymore, but I actually don't know the details. They are they just fencing it?
Broken ground on that housing project.
Oh, man.
Built in Oxnard. They broke ground a few months ago.
That is so wild. Yeah.
But that particular parcel where they put the oil sludge that gave rise to this is still protected as part of the agreement and the lawsuit. But it's just a tiny little corner of the full thing there. And actually the woman who found it, Kate Simons, she worked for Fish and Wildlife.
That's true, yeah. I forgot it was Kate, yeah. See, you guys know, you don't need me. I think there was one more person in the back. Yes, sir.
That last slide that you had was the photo of Santa Cruz Island rock crest.
Oh no. Unfortunately, I didn't put a picture of Santa Cruz Island rock crest for you. There's no real super rare plant in this picture. This shooting stars. But it was just so beautiful. I thought it was nice to look at the end of the night. Anybody else?
Oh, I was just wondering about, is the area where that was found, is it near where there was a little development that was poisoned and they had to pay everybody out there? Is there anybody that old like me out there near? Jeff, do you remember where that is? Is it near Fifth or?
I thought that was near Woolly Road.
Oh, near Woolly, okay.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Are you gonna?
Well, thank you, Heather. That was amazing. I have some new terms that I saved. Ecological skepticism, I love. Seed bulking is a term I never knew. Some of my favorite sayings was, you're stoked to be in that sauna. It's more fun than it sounds. Trying to have a Jurassic Park moment. And I'm not doing this so you think that I'm cool. I do think that you're cool. And yay, botany nerds. Right? You were an amazing speaker. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us tonight. Thank you for your work with the rare plants of our region. You are truly making our world a better place. And to those of you who have not had the chance to go up the coast to visit the Santa Barbara Botanic Garden yet, please put it on your calendar, make the trip, it is well worth it. We are nearing the end of our event. Before I let you go, I've got just a few words before we call it a night. Ventura Land Trust was founded 20 years ago as the Ventura Hillsides Conservancy, and its mission is to protect the land, water, wildlife, and scenic beauty of the Ventura region for the benefit of current and future generations. This is a big promise that we're making to those here today and those yet to come, and we can only fulfill that promise with your help. There are many ways that you can do that by providing your time, treasure, and talent. You can volunteer, donate, sponsor, become a member, share us and our work with your family and friends. Advocate for VLT and for open space. If you're on social media and you post about us tonight, make sure you tag us. If you'd like to learn more about ways you can support VLT, please connect with me or any member of our staff. We've got a number of us in the room. If you'll raise your hand real quickly. We've actually got quite a lot of us here tonight. And board, we've got a member of our board here as well. So feel free to connect with any of us. In the meantime, we hope to see you at one or more of our upcoming events. This is our first Environmental Speaker Series event of 2024. Please be sure to follow us on social media and join our mailing list to receive updates of the rest of the 2024 series. Please, let's thank Heather again for a fascinating presentation. Thank you to Channel Islands National Park for hosting us in our new venue, and our partner at SoCal Edison for sponsoring this series. On behalf of my colleagues at VLT and our Board of Trustees, I would like to thank you for attending, for being such a great audience, and for your support of Ventura Land Trust. Together, we are building a legacy, one that will continue to provide impact for the people and the wildlife of the Ventura region forever. It's a big word, and it's a promise not taken lightly. Thank you for your partnership in this effort. Be well, everyone, and have a good night.